So this week it's about the history and theories of development. Of course, is a very complex and long-lasting field, and I will not, and this is not intended to make up for the rings, but to provide some context. First of all, we need to situate ourselves where we were for this discussion, thinking from a historical perspective. We need to think about that modernization is not a linear, incremental, and homogeneous process, but is the result of multiple factors interacting at multiple spatial and temporal scales, and driven by a series of processes taking place over different periods of time, including technological advances, the expansion and consolidation of commercial relationships, cultural and customary changes, the formation of states, and the establishment of diplomacy and a set of rules for international relationships. And why it's so important? Because under this perspective, development is seen as a modernizing project in which the more advanced societies or the self-perceived more advanced societies provide with better practices and improvements to those seen as backward or primitive, first through colonialism that was highly paternalistic and in some cases seen as the destiny and the obligation of civilized uh, Eurocentric societies, and pursued as a key objective by populations alike, companies, institutions, and governments, and that the adoption of a capitalist system and the capitalist mode of production equaled achieving modernity. Again, the picture here shows the contrast between the wild, unorganized, and primitive situation on the top, and what happens when the civilizers come and show how things are supposed to be done. In the earlier discussion, or in the or like as a starting point, there are some points that need to be mentioned, which is including industrialization and free market economy, perceived as the best way to increase general well-being. As we have been seeing that from our charts and our lines and all the advances over the 200 years seems to be true, but also we need to think that it happens within a capitalist system in which one of its main characteristics is the division between capital on one side and labor on the other. So in other words, for those who own the means of productions and those whose only possession is their labor force and are required to sell it in order to provide for themselves. And this relationship or this transaction is coordinated through the free market. However, we see that this coordination is not always as easy and direct as we would expect or how the theory posits. Another important point is that production under capitalism, the main purpose of production is not consumption, but actually for selling. So goods and services become commodities whose main purpose is to be sold in the market. Because the purpose of production under capitalism is for sale, uh, and the workers don't have that much power. Capitalism requires constant expansion to acquire new markets and new sources of materials. And this expansion results in a very unequal pattern, both in spatial and social terms, and in many cases is imposed by force. There are plenty of historical examples and current example of this issue where we see um, conclaves of prosperity surrounded by wide areas of poverty or lesser development. We see it in all countries, but also in the relationship between the central areas and the peripheries, and the coexistence of high wealth with and poverty in many places around the world, as we have seen during the last couple of weeks. But also something that it's important is that the economic development is not perceived just as a natural process that is inherent to human existence, but is actively promoted as a political objective by countries, government, and other kind of agents. Under this scenario, we can see development policy or development economics as a post-colonialist project in which by the World War II and countries like the United Kingdom, France, mm, the Netherlands losing their last direct colonies, a new world order was necessary in which the integration of territories and people into the world economic system was, was maintained and presented as a civilizing and living conditions improvement project uh, that allowed to keep the or to restore a certain world order while maintaining domination structures and control after the colonization. This is very important in a post-World War II scenario that was characterized by the rise of the United States as the most powerful capitalist nation, a country that was not devastated to the war, by the war and was able to expand its influence. The challenge posed by the rise of the Soviet Union as a second global power and a socialist approach to for many regions that could counter the influence of capitalism and was seen as a real challenge and threat by the Western powers, and the establishment of national liberalization movements that were that gave that provided fertile soil to the establishment of independent movements that could threaten the hegemony of the West in wide regions of the world, especially South America, Africa, and Southeastern Asia. However, the lessons from World War II and the crisis from the 29 was that unfettered capitalism had important challenges and needed to be tamed to avoid challenges like the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of fascism, and the Great Depression that can result in authoritarian regimes. Um, so this process had, or there were multiple different approaches towards the way development could be carried out. This comes from the readings, and this table presents some of the main topics and the differences between different approaches to development from the and what in terms of who their main proponents were, the economic thought or tradition that supported it, what kind of problem was identified, and the type of solution that was proposed. So, from a Keynesian economics, in the first place, that saw or um, promoted an active state of an active role of the state as a driver of economic development, to the need to invest and improve both technology but also the organization of societies, to the claims and grievances from the developing world concerning their role and the situation in the world, for example, in Latin America, and the need to promote independent and own driven or self-driven development process to the grievances of of Marxism that imply liberalization from domination structures to finally to the rise of neoliberalism by the late 70s, early 80s, with the win of Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom and Ronald Reagan here in the United States, to the response and the contestation of this last approach. What I want to emphasize here is that different approaches and solutions have been proposed, all of them with their defendants and opponents that see the reasons and the causes and the solution to development challenges in different views and in many cases in response to traditions. And as a conclusion, this is to conclude the important thing here or the main takeaway from here is that there are many approaches and views and aspects that need to be considered when promoting or defending a specific development path with their limitations and their both ideological and technical challenges, and how this discussion is something that is permanent and quite cyclical. Um, yeah, that's it.